Hi again, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed the lunch and a short break. So let's begin the second half of the symposium. Blockchain is a user-centric system, and the user in this context actually refers to both the enterprises who are running their systems and apps on blockchain, as well as the consumers that are using the services and products that they provide. So it's all about starting with the users for whom you are designing and ending with a solution grounded in their needs and aspirations. So we really need to ask, what do the users need? And we need to see their realities.
So let's begin the second half of today's symposium, the adoption track, and welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Nitin Gaur. Nitin is currently global head of digital asset technology design of State Street Digital, transitioning part of the company's financial market infrastructure and its clients to the new digital economy. Nitin is an IBM Distinguished Engineer and IBM Master Inventor. He has journeyed with IBM for over 20 years. He most recently was Director of Financial Services, and in his previous role, Nitin served as founder and director of IBM Digital Asset Labs for 2 years, serving to devise industry standards, use cases, and working towards making blockchain for enterprise a reality. In parallel, Nitin has also served as CTO of IBM WorldWire, a cross-border payment solution utilizing digital assets. Nitin has also founded IBM Blockchain Labs and served as director to lead the effort to establishing blockchain practice for enterprises. Prior to this role, he worked in his capacity of CTO at IBM Mobile Payments and Enterprise Mobile Solutions. Nitin has a rich patent portfolio of over 100 US patents. His domain expertise spans digital currency, central banks, digital finance, fintech, redtech, and decentralized finance. He has been an industry leader in crafting and devising digital asset regulatory and compliance frameworks. He holds an MS in Management Information Systems and an MBA from the University of Maryland. Over to you, Nitin.
Thank you. That sounded so good in British accent. I really should practice that. It was supposed to be short and it went on and on. Well, glad to be here. Thanks to ISBA for invitation. I'm going to spend some time. I have 30 minutes. So the objective here is to inspire, not to educate. I have 300 slides and I have 30 minutes. I'm going to speak really, really fast. And the reason for speaking too fast is because when I went to US when I was 19 as a student, to call home, it was $1 a minute. And you had to economize your conversation to words per minute. So I had to really speak fast, and those habits still stick around. But my point of this story is that today you don't have to worry about that. Today it's practically free to call anywhere in the world. And in many cases, technology changes lives. Technology changes the way we think. Technology changes the way we sort of manage the world around us. And so my conversation today is going to be about Metaverse. And I know we had some conversation early on in terms of some of the thought process around blockchain and some of the basics. And while I don't subscribe to all of those thought processes, I'm going to take a little step back and give you a little perspective of where this world is heading. Many of us in the space, and I see a lot of familiar faces, spend over a decade in this industry. We see practical use cases. We see the industry transforming from the inside. And so I'm happy to share some of that thinking and the knowledge that goes with it. So one quick show of hands, how many of you can actually define, how many of you know what Metaverse is? Besides what you see in, I'm going to ask you to define it, George. How many of you can really define what Metaverse is? Just a show of hands. And I can't really define it, but I'm just asking if you can truly define it. Because this industry is still transforming from that perspective, and I looked into what are the different definitions. And if you take this definition, the first bullet that you see, of Wired magazine, you take virtual space, or you take cyberspace, or cyber virtual space, or any of the concoction of these terms, you'll find that it applies. You take this definition and it applies. If you look at the second bullet, which is look into snow crash, which is where the term was founded, by the way. Snow crash was the book which envisioned sort of the term metaverse. And if you look at the term meta, which is self-description, and verse, which is a short form of universe. The amalgamation of two words defines as to where we're heading. And the last bullet, which looks into where Forbes went into this whole element, was the ability for us to get into mixed reality, ability for us to get into the whole element of how do we behave in this real world, but we also have sort of an alt reality, which is what the last bullet describes. So a lot of content that you see is all about the AR, XR, VR. This is a new term that are emerging in this space: mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. But at the end of the day, we have the real world to live in. And so my perspective here is not so much in terms of gaming, or not so much in terms of what life you can live in that virtual world. It's what is the intent and what is the end game of this notion of metaverse. So again, it's multiple universes, and I'm going to paint that picture for you. I have 3 or 4 parts to this story. The first part is I'm going to just lay the big, broad landscape, where things are heading, what blockchain did, and if you have any naysayers or if you have any doubtful entities around blockchain, I can tell you there's a lot of tech behind it, but the whole idea behind any technology is to simplify it so it can become ubiquitous. It could have a utilitarian value around it. Second part, I'm going to spend some time on why tokenization. What does it mean? What is the economic incentives behind tokenization? The third part of the deck that I'm going to talk about is the overall strategic imperative. How do you make money in this? The entire pitch is around business imperatives. So money is being made in metaverse today, not from gaming and AR, VR, because there's enough business models around gaming and AR. But where is the real money? Is it opening a lobby in this virtual world? Absolutely not. So for us to dissect those trends and what's just shaping this industry, that's the intent of the last section, which is hopefully makes sense for the KPMG and the McKinseys of the world, where we look into how do we define this for the large corporations, and we begin to see some early days of what Disney and Nike and many of the other entities have done with this notion of NFTs, looking into loyalties, figuring out the new demographic that is digitally native, which is a little incomprehensible for many of us who are in this stage where we are half here and half there, per se. So barring definitions, if you look at tokenization, and why am I bringing tokenization? Because you'll find there are a lot of conversations that we do. So we talk about NFTs, we talk about digital identities, we do talk about things of value. In many cases, we'll find that the notion of tokenization is emerging because suddenly now we are shifting from what used to be a digitized world to a tokenized world. And defining what tokenization is, one, you have, if you look at things like early on discussed about Bitcoin, Ethereum, these are layer 1 protocols. These are protocols that are defined for incentive economic system. They have native tokens, but there's a lot of work that has been done in tokenizing identity, tokenizing non-fungible tokens, tokenizing the artifacts that you have in a gaming system. These are truly digital artifacts, but there was no way in the past to change ownership of these artifacts. As an example, my son is a gamer. I'm not a gamer. I've tried to understand this gaming space, and I completely failed miserably to understanding this. So I always have to go back to him and say, well, you're spending 100 hours in this space. What is the outcome? What is the economic output of this activity? So in many cases, you have all these systems that we are trying to design where tokenization becomes to play a central role, whether the token represents you in form of a digital identity, token represents your credentials, whether it's degrees, whether it's what you hold. I have 170 plus patents, so does many of the other speakers. What can we do in monetizing those areas? But more importantly, I think what tokenization does is it adheres to some of the fundamental tenets of blockchain: trade, trust, ownership, being the 3 fundamental tenets. And these tenets allow for many of you to be able to financialize assets which are not traditionally financed. So this is one of the fundamental elements where you have bankable assets. This is the $417 trillion economy that exists today. This is sum total of all the assets that banks know how to value: your home, your car, your mortgages, your equity, securities. But there's a whole lot of other things that you simply cannot go and monetize or financialize these. And these tokenizations then bring that to life. For example, your future earnings. There's no way for our financial institutions to let you monetize it. But suddenly we have seen, and you've seen this, NBA players and many of the athletes being able to give you a stake into the future earnings. That to me is a glimpse of each one of us being able to do that based on our history, our credentials, our education background, and that's tied to owning who we are. So this whole notion of ownership economy in Web 3.0 is a part of the whole element. So token has the digital representation, and in this metaversical sense, and this is a new term I coined, metaversical. I don't think the word exists, but from now it does, so please take it with you. The whole notion of metaverse is ability for us to be able to ensure that if we are relying upon ownership economy, then we have to be a bit more responsible of what we own. That includes how we take care of identity, how we take care of things that are tied to us. And I'll give you an example in a few minutes as to how you see the real world manifesting in the way we traverse the real assets that we have in the real world, but also the tokenized assets that we begin to accumulate as this industry matures. And then you have the asset itself. And the reason why I use the word asset, what gives something a value, right? So you could have an asset that you may have value for, but the world doesn't care. My first concert with my son was valuable to me. I've tokenized that little ticket as an NFT, but it has emotional value to me. I don't ever plan to sell it. Or you may have some of the other. So the question that I'm trying to bring up here is understanding what gives token its value. Because not every token is going to reach the moon. Not every token is going to make you rich. And there's a whole thesis behind understanding the different layers that are at play here. So a few things. We've used digital assets, we've used smart contracts, we use blockchain interchangeably as different distinct elements, and they are part of the same equation. Blockchain becomes the transaction systems, allowing you to be able to move things of value, foundational layer one, like basic stuff that allows you to be able to either create tokens or have tokenized value and move it across. Smart contracts essentially provide some basic rules. Bitcoin basically, all it did was move Bitcoins around. But you needed some level of logic. So the decentralized autonomous organization, smart contracts, gave you the whole element of some business logic, which says if this, then that, or if these conditions are met, then move the asset. And that actually helped a lot in terms of taking these digital assets and doing things like escrow, atomic swaps, allowing us to be able to say, hey, I'm not going to move this asset. It's not going to be an eBay problem. That I'm only going to move the asset once the payment has been received. And you can have these different smart contracts perform these distinct functions. And you can see as to how what is now driven by multiple set of entities is driven by one smart contract. So the smart contract then begin to disintermediate a lot of trust intermediaries and a lot of financial institutions. And that is the disruption we talk about, which will go into the overall evaluation of, you'll see some crazy numbers that Citibank and PwC and McKinsey's have put out together in terms of an opportunity landscape in 30 years, or like $17 trillion. So if you look at where they get those numbers from, are these small little sort of addressing of these elements. And then you have the digital assets. And you'll find the notion of token, which is such an overused term in the industry. A token is a token is a token, but we have to realize that they all have distinct values, different characteristics, and they all also have their own swim lanes, right? And not to mention the regulatory elements. I put a lot of energy in the slide. So there are 2 or 3 slides in this entire deck of 20 plus decks, or 300, the original number. Take some of these things with you. So this to me is, imagine a world where you put on your, and again, I'm going back to the gaming world, you put on your goggles or your virtual reality goggles, your biometrics identified, your wallet is invoked, and you're suddenly able to play a game, make your earning in that game, be able to take the sword. That's my common example I give, that you earn something in the game that you can either today buy, or you can go and play and spend 100 hours to earn something that gives you special capabilities. And that's the investment of time you've made in the things that you love to do. But today you cannot take the sword and go and sell it, or engage in a financial primitive activity around the sword. So what do? Sword represents a non-fungible token because it's unique, it belongs to you. Suddenly now you want to be able to take your identity, move from this gaming world to a different universe. So now I'm dealing with different universes. One is a gaming universe. I take the non-fungible tokens, and I want to be able to borrow and sell that asset. I go into a different universe, a decentralized financing protocol, and I'm able to take this non-fungible tokens and be able to collateralize it, whether I want to borrow it, lend it, sell it, any of the other activities. For me to be able to do this, I have to do a few things. Just like in the real world, and you have the downstream activities that I can then convert them into stable coins, then eventually go to my bank, and suddenly now you can see as to how the entire value chain happens. It's all tied to you as an individual. You have your identity that's tied to your biometrics. You are identified in each of these different universes, whether it's a gaming universe, decentralized finance universe, stablecoin universe, all these different ecosystems that are specialized in specifying the marketplace for certain tokens. For all this to happen, a few things need to happen underneath the covers. One, your assets should be recognized, just like when you go from one country to another country, your dollar or your Singapore dollar has to be exchanged for let's say, Indonesian rupiah. Now that has to go through a conversion process, which means there's a valuation, there's understanding as to what value is that we're willing to sell, and the exchanges in between will provide that value. But not only that, you have to show your passport, generally for money exchanges. Imagine engaging in that digital activity where suddenly your wallets define your identity. You have all these different assets. You're able to exchange. So not only the value information about the asset that you own, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with value systems, but you also have to be able to move your identity from one ecosystem to another ecosystem. You have to be recognized, you have to be verified, identified. So a lot of underlying tech, I think Alice was talking about this early on, there's a lot of tech underneath the covers that will facilitate this transportation of verification validation systems and coordination between various layer 1 protocols that specialize in, say, NFTs or DeFi or many other protocols. And we see glimpses of it now. There are some very specific protocols. I think Uniswap announced today, allowing you to be able to collateralize your non-fungible tokens and seeing what the market for that is. So what you see on the top is multiple universes with multiple asset classes, could belong to a single individual, to multiple individuals, and all this sits upon this massive infrastructure, which we're calling as quote-unquote Web 3.0. I'll go into Web 3.0 in a few minutes. I think one of the gentlemen asked a few questions in terms of, is blockchain centric to Web 3.0? But foundation to Web 3.0 are these constructs, wallets, tokens, DeFi, layer 1, layer 2, providing scalability, providing the speed. Because if you're relying upon instant movement of your sword to NFT, to all these other tokens, it has to be at a digital speed. You cannot wait for 7 minutes in one ecosystem, 15 minutes in another ecosystem, 30 minutes in the next one. There has to be some service level agreements. And what you find are the enabling technologies that still we're working on. And the industry is trying to mature them, both in terms of technical innovation, but also in terms of investments of capital and talent, to be able to get to the point where we can do this seamlessly. And so one thing I will tell you that, how many of you are, and barring the consultant community in the room, digital transformation. How many of you heard the term digital transformation? Okay, I'll include now the consultant community. How many of you heard of digital transformation? Okay, you have. So imagine we are shifting from digital transformation to transforming digital itself. And that's a fundamental shift in our thinking, that we want to tame the digital ecosystem that have evolved to perform what digital systems are doing. So that shift from digital transformation to transforming digital is what essentially we're trying to do here. And that leads to the Metaverse elements that I discuss here, right? The whole element of the technology itself, so it's not just one tech. You need to have a killer, stellar UI, UX sort of framework. You need to have, again, that your biometrics is not tied to just a combination of multi-factor authentication. It has to be implied. So this whole notion of embedded finance comes to life at this point. AI, machine learning is embedded into the whole thing. And I built a system myself where suddenly now you have this chained, I think Dr. Riddle talked about this earlier on, that you have chained set of data. The beauty of some of that structures is the fact that AI, machine learning rely upon the quality of data. And if you have a structured data which is chained together, then you can deploy multiple AI functions that gives you real-time information. So if you're moving towards a model which is shifting towards a real-time movement of assets, you also need real-time visibility. You also need real-time fraud analysis. You also need real-time. So you're suddenly moving into high gear, and that's what I mean by transforming digital, per se. And then you have the ecosystem. So while you have all this tech underneath the covers, technology providers are working hard at that. You're in between, and then you have your representation of yourself, whether it's form of an avatar or form of biometrics, that then ties into social acceptance, privacy, data privacy issues, giving you the control of what you want to share, what you don't want to share, which today you don't have. And that also is a Web 3.0 agenda, which I'll shortly touch upon. What are the benefits? So you're saying, Nitin, all this is great. Like, I'm not going to be a gamer. I'm not going to be doing, what are the industrial benefits of this? Of course, I spent some time in this, both in terms of space tech. As you know, 3D printing has been hauled as things that we can do in areas which have constrained availability of resources. So taking that advantage is, in many cases, airline industry, for example, healthcare industry, for example, looking into customer interaction. You begin to see now that it's not just about you putting on your goggles and going playing a game. You suddenly are interacting in a true digital sense and having a true digital handshake, an ability for you to be able to move not only things of value, but actually transact. At the end of the day, blockchain is a value network. You are moving value on the network. So it has to be at some level regulated. But in most cases, it is not just it's an evolution of internet, because internet was never designed to move value. It's always moving information. We have somehow encapsulated of wrapping values, information about the value and move the value itself, but it's never designed to move value. So some of these sort of work that we've done is looked into saying what are the industrial application of these things that can benefit from it. Of course, in my opinion, some of the high-skilled, high-value, high-cost, high-labor industries are taking advantage of this only because you have very specialized skills that cannot be in all multiple places. And I think space tech has gone really far with this, not only because they are in this specialized area, but also if you look at aviation, airlines, in oil and natural gas pipeline and so on and so forth, becomes an interesting part. So that was the landscape, right? And ideally, if you're on a whiteboard, I would ask you for questions, but we don't have the luxury of that, so I'm going to move on with this, and eventually we'll table the questions for later on. Web 3.0. We have to talk about this because it is not just some fuzzy jargon, which was, again, I didn't subscribe to that notion that was discussed earlier that, hey, it's just we're still doing everything on internet. We begin to see the internet busting at the seams. We see vulnerabilities. We see security challenges with financial systems. We see security challenges with all the critical infrastructure, our airlines and our energy grids and so on and so forth. So before we go into Web 3 and what Web 3 enables, we need to know what is the evolution. So again, I'm dating myself. Internet, early days, we were consuming information. Internet, we would exchange the websites and say, hey, they have cool information. We're simply consuming information. Until we moved to a part where we had CGI script, early days of interacting with sending information, ordering stuff online. That led to us starting from ordering to be able to say, hey, let me go and communicate, let me go and interact. So peer-to-peer communication happened. Social media evolved. We had HTTPS, and it took us almost 35 plus years before we were comfortable buying airline tickets, doing banking. And when we started doing these things, you begin to then disintermediate the middleman. How many of you actually go to a travel agent? Please don't raise hand, even if some of you do it. So no one goes travel agent but there is a travel agent function, right? So you have all this information intermediaries who are sitting between you and some green screen behind the scene, back in the day, and we have removed them. But you have new intermediaries, right? You have Expedia, you have Trivago, you have Klook, which provide you a much more experiential services model, which gives you the ability to give you more than simply booking tickets for you, the book experience. They give you a bit more higher level of service. So when I talk about disintermediation with blockchain and DLT leading to Web 3.0 world, you will see that a lot of inefficiencies and cost with existing intermediaries go away, but you have both of new intermediaries. And this is where we all in the room need to look into the opportunity sense of the whole thing. So Web 2.0 now begin to show its challenges. Misinformation, disinformation. You have no control of data. Your data gets leaked. Your data gets hacked. You have honeypots. You have all these sort of challenges where certain companies, that is all the big tech companies, begin to have your information, have your data. Web 3.0 sort of changes the paradigm to say now you have ownership economy. So this is all about creator-led economy, ownership economy, synonymous with Web 3.0 to say, what will it take for either you have in charge of your own data, your own assets, your own identity, or you rely upon a trusted intermediary which provide that function for you, but they still rely upon your consent type element. So this creator-led economy leads to, again, there are use cases, business models, technology-led sort of fundamentals that go with it, is where we are heading. So if we are relying upon treating data as value, treating your like as value, treating all the things that you own as value, and relying on your consent, your healthcare records, which today none of you are able to monetize, then you need to then embark upon some of the Web 3.0 constructs of how do you facilitate and embody that ownership? How do you make sure that it's tied to your real identity? How do you make sure that... So those are some of the imperatives that the Web 3.0 in the industry is emerging as some of the other elements. And I think the gentleman in the front has asked earlier, so while blockchain provides a transaction system in general, and some of these imperatives rely, your Web 3.0 is a collection of technologies. It's not like one thing, it's not like one great place to be. It's an evolutionary process. It requires you to have, and I use the word wallet because it's a vernacular that people understand, but essentially it's a system that gives you some element of ownership that goes with it. You have tokenized form of things, your identity, your NFTs, things that you value, your data, your social media likes, decentralized financing, which again, the fact that you value data, your healthcare record, your identity records, your credit scores, then you have the ability to monetize the data, which leads to something like a decentralized financing element, giving you the ability to financialize things that traditionally you were not able to. And that unlocks a whole new economic models and economic sets that go with it. And of course, layer 1, layer 2 are the protocol layers that facilitate the transaction system that lets you move the tokenized assets. So I will take a short pause. Are you all with me so far? Not lost? You're good? Okay. So part 2 is about tokens. Token is a token is a token. You have various definitions of fungible, non-fungible tokens. I'm not going to go into details of those tokens, but remember one thing though, that you have to understand, one, what gives token its value, and there are a few slides I'm going to talk about the various sort of ecosystems that define. There are different layers, just like internet, as discussed earlier, had different layers. Blockchain and DLT and various token ecosystem have its own layers that you have to understand that sits upon each other, that defines the cumulative value of how these systems accrue. In most cases, then you have fungible tokens, hybrid tokens, different standards that let you do different things. So non-fungible, for example, your identity is yours. It will always be yours. You will be who you are. Your healthcare will always be yours. But can you not then have a temporary sharing of that healthcare record, either for insurance benefits or monetizing the data, and be able to apply a AI model on that piece of data, and then you get to monetize it, which today you don't. In most cases, no one does. As opposed to a fungible token, which is something like a cryptocurrency or central bank digital currency or stable coins, which lets you pay for things, a payment instrument of sorts, which doesn't really matter. A dollar is the same as a dollar somewhere else. And that's some of the fundamental differences that we look into this from technology point of view, per se. So you have simple tokens, complex tokens, and again, as I mentioned earlier, they don't exist in vacuum. Tokens, digital assets, blockchain systems, and smart contracts are part of the single sort of framing that if you have a token, you need to move the token. You need rails to move the token. You need some governance element on top of the token to be able to drive that. Business imperatives. So these are the layering. And by the way, each of these slides, connect with me on LinkedIn. I've written a paper on these topics that will help you understand why these layering exist. But these layers are really what provides the value system around it. So layer 1 is a fundamental blockchain layer. Layer 2 is trying to solve the inefficiency of layer 1, which will have its own token. So each of these layers will have their own token. But what you need to understand is, which is the biggest myth in the industry in general, that you have a cumulative effect of these layers. So layer 4 generally have to rely upon layer 3, layer 2, layer 1. It cannot exist on its own, which also means that it has to have a cumulative effect of the value system that it embodies, because sitting at that certain juncture of what it represents. So it's an ecosystem at the end of the day. So just remember that not all tokens are created equal, and this has always helped me stay back to fundamentals and basics. Say, where do you sit? And if you're in layer 4, then you have risks, because if layer 1 is a problem, then layer 4 token becomes a problem. And if layer 4 to me becomes what my vision is, that these are the future of Amazon of the world, of the crypto world. So Amazon, as you know, took us 35 plus years for Amazon to be able to, or any of the shopping sort of entities now, is ability for you to buy, is hiding the complexity behind payment, shipping, supply chain, tracking and tracing, delivered to your door the next day. They go through close to 60 to 70 systems behind the scenes. You're not aware of that. And they're able to do that because they have this massive sort of coordination system that happens behind the scenes. It took us almost 40 years after the evolution of internet to be able to get to that point. So my vision of the entities who are trying to look into lower level infrastructure is, who is that entity that's going to exploit this layer to be the Amazon of the crypto and the digital asset world. And some examples are yield farming, you can Google it later, that are trying to find the inefficiency in the system as well and find the extractable value from those systems. So I'm going to give one example. This is one universe that I understand, so I put the stack here. Remember we talked about this metaverse of gaming systems and NFT systems. There's a stack behind each of those universes, which collectively is sort of the metaversical linkages that I talked about earlier. Is what is a DeFi stack? Decentralized financing. It is finance, which means it has to deal with financial primitives, borrowing, lending, your ability to be able to buy and sell and provide a marketplace. And many of these protocols, again, from layer 1 providing settlement services to moving up to the stack, they all have, again, either their own tokens or they rely upon some of the underlying structures. And what you see on the left-hand side is all equity-based companies who are providing these are new intermediaries, as I discussed earlier. They are providing KYC services, they're providing data services, but they're not exactly token-based model. There are new companies that have emerged. There are close to 900 of these companies who are not token-based companies, but they're providing first-class, first-grade services to either provide you AI, machine learning, data analysis, financial crimes analysis. And so to me, that is an ecosystem that's growing rapidly. So it's not just about tokens, it's the adjunct ecosystem that goes around it. How am I doing on time? A few minutes. Perfect. So I have this opportunity to think, this is to me was the important part for everyone, is how do we make money from this? And again, the idea is to inspire, not to educate, so take the deck later on. You have all these numbers, and I took this number from Bloomberg Intelligence, Citi, 13 trillion, Morgan Stanley, 8 billion. So imagine the spread between 8 billion and 13 trillion, it's staggering. And Matthew Ball is 30 trillion. So you have all these amazing numbers. And I had to ask myself, where do they get these numbers? Of course, there's no data, so you have to extrapolate, you have to make stuff up. But if you realize earlier on, right, the ability for me to be able to create and understand the market opportunity with the newer intermediaries, the newer markets, the newer business models that's emerging. I think these numbers reflect that opportunity. It reflects the opportunity that today, with the example that you have, the $471 trillion of bankable assets, but what if every human being, 8 billion, reaching 9 billion soon, are able to monetize their future earnings, are able to monetize their healthcare records, are able to get into gaming and be able to move value globally and remove some of the value intermediaries that are there. I think these numbers reflect that opportunity. And some of them have a staggering number between next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But that to me is the opportunity. And you can pick your poison, you can pick your vertical, the opportunity goes in that direction. And what's driving the change is some of these things, demographic shifts. In terms of post-information age, we no longer can afford to, lock our credits and sit at home, and it has to be a much more better system for us to be able to interact with the digital ecosystem. There's a cultural shift that's happening. There's demographic change where you have more digital natives who are fed up and, frankly, are laughing at the system that we have built over time. So that's driving some of these changes in terms of the complex geopolitical landscapes that go with it. So those are the things. And then you have the technology, which again shortlisted a few things that are happening in support of that industry. And then you have the concept and values that is shifting around identity, around how we value our information, as to what is our value system as the new demographics takes shape, changing that whole model. A few things around this is a really important part that, yes, we have bankable assets. These are the assets that banks understand. We have tokens around, we have sort of a structure, a risk model that you can go and borrow and lend and buy. But what's interesting is the non-bankable assets. These are the assets that today you have no risk models, you have no lending models. I think it's important for you to understand that element. Few things, I'm going to take a pause here. I'll leave a few minutes for questions. I think I'm getting looks to say leave the stage, but some of the elements of Metaverse strategy are, like I put a few or five together. There are barriers. The barriers are first is tech maturity and talent. I think there was discussion all morning and look, we are still not there yet. Of course, we're not there yet, but we are getting there. Second thing is ideological directions, policy and privacy issues. A lot of this stuff is still emerging, and we've seen that with the last week with all kinds of contagion of incompetence that has happened in the industry. But all those are, in my opinion, growing pains. But these are the barriers, understanding, having a framing, understanding the regulatory landscape that we have to address with. And I have broadly categorized in discipline terms that you have 3 I's. You need the infrastructure. It has to be really good. So this is the first I. This is the DLT, blockchain, the right security infrastructure. We talked about quantum this morning. What does that comprise of? Second is instrument. A token is a token is a token, but they all have their different sort of perspectives. They all have the different swim lanes. So what are instruments that we need to run on this infrastructure? And the last part is, the most critical part is intelligence, which is data. It's no longer about you getting an insight and getting a report. Data is value now, but now we are encapsulating those values in tokenized form and monetizing it, and you have ownership rights to that insights too. So those are the shifts that we are embarking upon. And with that, I will pause. I hope I didn't go over time, and happy to answer any questions. But hope it made sense. Again, I have 30 minutes, a lot to cover. Metaverse is a huge topic, and I'm hoping you now had better definitions under your belt than I did when I started this journey. So, questions, comments? Yeah, please.
Thank you. Really impressive presentations. I'd like to ask from your, hi, my name is Hao. I represent MetaBank, a digital bank. We're trying to do something really, try to digitalize not just the financial transaction, but the overall digital economy for the world. So I want to see from your perspective, how is this whole initiative is going to be driven? Is it going to be by large corporates, or you think it's government, or I mean, just like who is going to be the first one to really throw these ideas to this? Because I see under the ground there are a lot of crypto Web3 developers, but I don't think they're going to really change this, make the needle. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll tell you this, that usually the answer to most of these questions in this conference is like, look, it's the startup community. It's always the innovators who are doing this. But I'll tell you this, in my 12 years that I've spent in this space, you are building value systems. You are building rails that moves value. That has to be regulated. It's regulated today, and there has a regulatory perspective on the fact that suddenly now you're opening up these value systems, which again, meant to be trustless, meant to be open. So there'll always be a regulatory focus, either on the infrastructure, which is the DLT and blockchain itself, or the instruments, which is where we debate what's a security, what's a payment instrument, what's a commodity, and everything else. So it's always a public-private partnership. I think the hype curve talked about the whole thing that all these small companies are innovating. Many of them get purged, whether it's their resilience and capital or what the case may be. But in some cases, you have the partnership between those successful entities and large corporations, because large corporations provide the infrastructure, they provide the licensing and regulatory framework that you need to operate in that model. And that's true that as you monetize these things and as you're going towards stablecoin and CBDC as payment instruments, they become payment rails. So at some point, you are dealing with movement of value, and those infrastructure will always be under regulatory purview. I'm a technologist. I try to understand this. I like the crypto bros, but I want to be pragmatic about this as the industry shifts, is what can be done today and not just drink the trustless Kool-Aid all the way through, because there's a pragmatic element to this, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pay you $5 later for asking the question, but appreciate the time. But thank you for your time.